All right, joining me now, very excited about this, from The Ringer and The Ringer Podcast Network. He's all over the place and has covered wrestling for a very long time, and he is part of the Vince McMahon docuseries on Netflix, Mr. McMahon, David Shoemaker. David, thanks for doing this. How's it going?
It's going good, man. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure. I watched all 6 episodes, I think the second day it was out. Well, no, I did 4 Wednesday night, 2 Thursday morning. So I wanted to consume it all. So let me just start with you here. You're on the docuseries as a talking head, for lack of a better, I don't know what the exact title is, but you're also a producer, correct?
Yeah, I was a consulting producer. I mean, basically, when we started the process, when Bill had I think Bill had already agreed with Netflix to bring on Chris Smith as a director before I was really involved. And then the first thing I did in any sort of official capacity was just, meet Chris and just talk about wrestling for a couple hours, just to sort of like try to get him in the headspace. Part of what makes it, I think, so effective is that he comes in as an outsider. But there is just, to be able to hit the ground running, you needed a little backup. So that's how I started. And then as the production went on, I hung around. I was there. I went on some of the shoots with some of the wrestlers and other figures, and just kind of helped give background. Was in on the production meetings and on the and on the process of Chris did all the interviews, but I was sometimes there in the back of the room to wave a flag if I thought somebody was just totally making something up, that sort of thing. So, consultant. That's what we landed on.
You must have been waving that flag a lot when Vince was talking.
When Vince was talking, Hulk Hogan in the documentary says that it's impossible to get the real story out of anybody involved, and that was when he said that was one of the all-time gratifying moments for me, because that's what I'd been saying over and over again to everybody working on the movie, and then Hulk Hogan just sat down and said the thing, and I was just like, there you go, okay, thank you.
So it's interesting. When I was finished, I had so many different thoughts, because I'm watching it as a long time, old school, new school WWE fan. Mm-hmm. And then I'm watching it as sort of a sports media person.
Yeah.
So when it was over, my first thought was, for me, because I didn't know everything, but I knew a lot of what was in it. This was a psychological story about, to me, a man who is completely detached from reality. Mm-hmm. Has done horrific things. I guess I'm supposed to say allegedly, but I believe most of them. But with the caveat being this insane childhood where he did not meet his father until he was 12 years old and was abused by his stepfather and mother. Mm-hmm. So I guess, could you describe what the challenge was like? Because of, I feel like it's 2 different things. You have that psychological aspect of it, and then you have the history of the WWE, which there is no bigger or more important person than him. Was it difficult to sort of get it all in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was 6 6-hour-long episodes. It could have easily been 10 with just the material that we had. And if this were going to be, as a wrestling nerd, if it had everything that I would have wanted to hear in it, it probably could have been, 100 hours long.
Right.
The list of interviews that we didn't do just out of expediency. By the time we got to, the back half of the list, we already had 20 hours worth of documentary. There's just, and we there are a lot of decisions were made above my pay grade, but it was really hard. And the story itself, like you said, just to tell the story, people, you said you knew a lot of this stuff. There have been some wrestling fans that said they knew most or all of it. But to get to the part, to be able to tell the story so that anybody could watch it takes so much time. And to get through that in interviews takes so much time, to get to, and I didn't do the interviewing, but I could just watch them do it. To build the trust and the confidence to engage in these interviews, to get through the nuts and bolts before you get to the, darker stuff or the more interesting, controversial stuff. It's a long road,
The vibe I got is that Vince is just he's not going to go there, and he's not going to give you anything on the childhood trauma. Like he mentioned it, but he mentioned it in such a blasé way that it was bizarre to me. You know, didn't meet his biological father till he was 12, and then even then did not seem like any kind of loving, caring relationship. And it's like, okay, it clearly got passed down to Shane, who becomes the most sympathetic figure in the whole doc, in my opinion. Am I accurate in saying he just wasn't going to give you anything on that, or did you guys make a decision to not dig deeper into that?
No, I mean, listen, it was very hard to penetrate. And again, this is me just standing literally in like the back corner of a room while this is in a dark room, you know, while these interviews are going on. You know, they asked the questions over and over again, you know, and what you saw was one of those and sometimes two of those, but he was sort of impenetrable. And I should also say that when all the allegations, as you said, all these stuff came out about Vince, we still had like 2 interviews to go at least, you know, and not only with Vince, you know, scheduled. And not only did he not come back to face the music in terms of, you know, the charges that had been, you know, the accusations that had been leveled, you know, there still would have, you know, there were still a lot of places that we wanted to go in the interview that we never got to, you know, and this sort of, you know how it is. You do interviews. You ask the same question, you ask a question, they don't answer, you ask it, you find a different way, maybe you find a third way, and then you say, okay, let's get back to this later in the interview because clearly this is just a stalemate. Did
he let you guys know he wasn't going to do the last 2 interviews, or did he just not show up?
I don't know the mechanics of that. I mean, I know there was, I mean, I feel like there were certainly times after the allegations came out where it seemed hopeful, but I don't know what his communication was. It was never very good.
Yeah. That was my other takeaway from it when it was over was I couldn't imagine how difficult it must have been for you guys to do this doc, which when you start it is sort of the history of pro wrestling, the WWE, Vince McMahon, and this juggernaut that is pro wrestling. I mean, the money it has made then and now is off the charts.
Yeah.
And then you're hit with this unbelievable curveball with this lawsuit by Janelle Grant, who alleges horrific things from sexual abuse to sexual trafficking. When that lawsuit comes out, was it a complete shock to you guys? And then what was sort of like scramble mode like when that happened for you guys?
Well, yeah, of course it was a shock. I mean, when the first allegations came, when the first Wall Street Journal story broke, nobody outside of a couple people on WWE's board, I guess, knew that was coming. And so yeah, it was a huge shock to us. I mean, it was the process of producing the film just had taken a really, you know, was taking a long time, right? There's a lot of interviews to do. You're working around Vince's schedule and everything else. And I think that they were in the process of editing it, you know, shaping it into the final form when the allegations came out. And of course, at that point, you just kind of throw everything out the window and figure it out. It obviously WWE was a producer in the original organization of the film, and they're not now. It was obviously just impossible to produce that with their, you know, I mean, with Vince being so close to the company. And so everything was just sort of up in the air. But there was never a point where the documentary wasn't getting made. I mean, thankfully we had Chris Smith and his team and Netflix, you know, backing it the whole way. And it was, you know, everybody was convinced that this was a story that needed to be told even before the allegations came out. And then at that point, it was even more necessary.
Did the fact that WWE made a deal with Netflix for Monday Night Raw come into play in any way, shape, or form? Because it was, I mean, some people were surprised Netflix would still air the doc based on that.
It didn't affect me in any way. I can't really speak to it. I mean, all I know is that, like, you know, it's a totally different division. It's a totally different executive that's in charge of these separate things. And I'm sure they had internal discussions. I wasn't privy to them at all. I mean, that's like I said, way above my pay grade. Yeah. But I'm sure, I mean, listen, there's a lot of people that have had different theories about, I think, you know, why they shouldn't do this or why they absolutely would do this and whatever else. I don't know. I mean, this thing was public and it was in discussion and it was, you know, it's a documentary. It is facts, you know, and Netflix, I think, is big enough to be more than one thing at a time.
Yeah. Can you elaborate at all on, I'm just curious to follow up on something you said. You said WWE was a producer, now they're not. What does that mean exactly?
Well, they were a partner in the documentary. I mean, that was sort of a necessary thing to get Vince on board and let alone getting the footage and the rights to everything else.
So did the partnership end when the allegations came out?
Yeah, yes. I don't know the mechanics of it, but it was clear at that moment, I think, to everybody that the documentary could not be made as a WWE in partnership with WWE. Yeah. And people, so somebody negotiated their exit. That's all I really know.
I want to get into Shane and Stephanie because I thought Shane was fascinating. On the doc. When it was over, I had one big criticism of it. The one thing I couldn't figure out, and this was the only thing that I really couldn't figure out, is throughout the doc, Vince talks about having affairs, his constant thinking about sex. Uh-huh. We know what the Janelle Grant thing comes out. There was accusations of raping a female referee, all this. And you guys had Linda, and there was no questions about the state of the marriage, Vince's cheating. I'm just wondering what happened there or didn't happen there or why it didn't happen.
I think it's clear from watching. I mean, you asked about Vince not giving you anything. We weren't getting, Linda was not the most forthcoming person in that interview either. So, I think I was there for that one. I don't even remember if there was more good stuff on the cutting room floor, but certainly wish we could have gotten some more details about that, about that from her as well. Yeah.
That was the only thing that seemed off to me, was like, how's she not being asked about this? Because there was obviously something there with that marriage. I mean, who knows what the state of it is now, but she did the doc, which I found fascinating.
Yeah, there does seem to be it's a very business relationship, I would say.
Tell me, were you surprised that Shane McMahon was so honest and vulnerable?
Yeah, I think I was. Partly because in my impression of him from afar, that's not, that hasn't been my read on him. And I think partly it was the framing. I mean, the way it all came off, it was what Shane said. I think if, absent from what Vince said around it, has a lot less power. And I think framing it in the way that it did by the incredible, production team, the editors on this thing are just amazing. Really just drove that point home. Yeah. There's a lot of talk in all the interviews that they did about Succession. Well, literally, and also the parallels to the TV show. Yeah. And I think at one point someone asked Vince if he'd seen it, and he was like, "Why does everybody keep saying I should watch that show?" And that was that. But yeah, I mean, I think that it really surprised me too. I mean, I'd seen the Raw Shane interview, but it wasn't until I really started seeing final cuts that I felt the kind of gravity of it. He certainly did come off as the hero in that. I mean, not the hero, as the sort of the guy you're rooting for and all that. Stephanie, on the other, well, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, he came off as sane and rational, which, considering who his father is, was surprising.
Yeah. I always get like updates. People will text me, "Oh my God, I saw so-and-so wrestler. The Shane McMahon updates are always like, I saw Shane on the subway. I saw Shane at the Whole Foods. Like you hear different stuff, but he does seem like remarkably together for everything that he had to go through in that company, with that family. Yeah.
You were going to say something about Stephanie?
I was going to say, of all the people in the documentary, Stephanie was the one who I really wish we had gotten a later interview with, because that interview was one of the earliest ones we did. I mean, as you can maybe tell, she's sitting in her office in the old Titan Towers, which is no longer anyone's office, and certainly not Stephanie's, because she's no longer with the company. I mean, she left the company twice, came back once, and is now fully gone from it in the span of the time that we were working on the film. And her current relationship with her father is only the stuff of sort of rumor and innuendo. I wish that we got a more clear-eyed, post-allegation conversation with her that could have been on film.
Yeah, I think now that's where the wrestling fan in me was the Stephanie thing of her leaving the company once Vince came back from the first retirement. And I thought the way you guys did it was brilliant, where you have all these, Vince basically shitting on the concept of retirement. And he says, go die if you're going to retire.
Yeah.
And then you show the tweet, at 77, it's time for me to retire. I mean, you can tell what the situation is there. Her leaving when he came back, it is what the current family dynamic is. I mean, do these people have like Sunday dinners? Are they together on holidays with Vince and Stephanie and Paul Levesque? Triple A? I mean, it is unbelievable. I mean, you could do another doc based on that.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I mean, we just don't know, and maybe we'll get a season 2 and we can figure all this stuff out. But the Stephanie point is, I think, really important. I mean, she left the company after Vince came back, and this is pretty close time-wise to her walking out and leading a "Thank you, Vince" chant at his, live on television on SmackDown after his first retirement. So, I mean, whatever happened, whatever change, in mindset happened with her, and who knows, I think is incredibly intriguing.
Yeah. In terms of the wrestling, there were some really, like I said, I knew a lot, didn't know everything, and the stuff I learned I was really into. The fact that Vince, before sort of hooking up with Hulk Hogan and creating Hulkamania and making it Hulk Hogan's company and creating this money machine, thought about Dusty Rhodes in that spot. I thought that was a fascinating nugget.
Thank you for pointing out the first time that my jaw dropped as a wrestling nerd during the overhearing an interview.
That was my reaction too.
That was one, and we were like, we fought and clawed to keep that in the final cut, because I was like, that's one of the tiny things that's important. But I mean, and Vince that Vince was willing and eager to say it. There was some other stuff from those early days that was on the cutting room floor. Bill had asked me in a previous, when I talked with him on his podcast about what I missed it. I mean, what thing that we had to edit out that I regretted being out the most, and I forgot until I rewatched it the most recent time. There was a whole bit about how much he just loathed Gorilla Monsoon. Personally,
well, that was. I don't mean to interrupt. I'll say this so you can follow up on that. The second thing that blew me away after Dusty was that Vince's father was going to leave the company to Gorilla Monsoon and not Vince.
Yeah. Well, as before Vince was in the picture, I think it was a pretty normal, a pretty understandable situation where like Gorilla was younger and wanted to keep doing it, and he wanted to inherit that territory someday, and then the son appears, and that isn't in the cards anymore. Right. Vince sort of painted as a real rivalry between the two to win the dad's affection and the ability to own the company moving forward. And in Vince's telling, I think he got a great satisfaction, not just from buying the company instead of Gorilla, but in being Gorilla Monsoon's boss moving forward. That was the real victory. And as you can see, that repeats over and over again in his career. He enjoys employing the people who he's had feuds with, because this is, armchair psychologist.
Yeah.
Being their boss is the ultimate victory. Having them be homeless is not a victory for him in the same way as being the boss of them is.
That's why I say detach from reality, because one of the themes of the doc throughout is just Vince's constant, it's all about business. It's all about business. It's all about business. Everything for business. Anything for business. There's no real life for him. Yeah. That's the impression I got. There is no real life for Vince McMahon.
And that's what makes it impossible, really, to do a documentary that's just about Vince and not about the history of the WWE under his control. I mean, this is a man that famously sleeps 3 hours a night, and gets up and starts working again. I mean, this is a man who in our we talk to the writers, all the rumors you hear are true. It's like the writers meeting's supposed to happen at noon, and so everybody has to be there with their Sunday best on, ready to go at noon, but we all know it's not going to start until 8 p.m. at the earliest, and that's, so it's this sort of waiting game. And we did that. That was our production process too. We had call time for the Vince interview would be noon. He'd show up at 11 p.m., Like,
Wow.
and we would just be getting constant updates throughout the day from his secretary about how far he'd been pushed from his, supposed schedule. And I said this before, but these are not like some naive art school students. Like this is a very professional, very experienced documentary production team who have shot with some of the most eccentric and egocentric people you can imagine, and they were floored every step of the way with Vince's inability to keep a schedule or to
I feel like there can be a documentary about making the documentary.
Oh God, they're absolutely
docuseries,
good.
I should say. Yeah. For me, by far, not even close, the moment that blew me away more than any moment in the 6 episodes was the story, and I should have, my bad for not discussing this when we were talking about Shane, was the story that Paul Heyman told about Shane having an idea in a production meeting. Vince didn't like the idea, and Vince basically telling Shane, well, if you want to, get your idea through, you're going to have to kill me, gives him a knife and tells him to stab him.
Yeah.
This is what I mean about psychologically damaged, detached from reality. When you heard that story, what was your reaction?
I couldn't believe it. I mean, Heyman has some of the. I mean, he's a sort of Zelig character, right? I mean, he's sort of almost like Forrest Gumpy. He just like he's walking through the background of all these crazy moments in pro wrestling history, probably pulling more strings than Forrest Gump did. But his point of view is just one of a kind.
Yeah.
I was at times really surprised at how open he was just about psychoanalyzing Vince, but telling that story in particular, I think, it was jaw dropping too. I mean, it's absolutely impossible to understand the dynamic between father and son there. I think at its most basic level, it seems like it's all formed around Vince's experience with his father, not just the absence, but that's certainly a part of it. But the way that Vince started working with his dad and eventually took over the company from his dad, there seems to be this dance they do where Shane somehow intuitively knows that to get Vince's approval, he needs to do what Vince did in taking the company. But Vince, unlike his father, has no interest in retiring. And I think Vince, in some abstract way, probably wants that from him too, but is just unwilling to play the role of Vince Sr., right? He doesn't want to step away. And so it's this, they're locked in this eternal conflict.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, now neither of them are with the company.
Yeah. When I finished the part 6 of the docuseries, I said to myself, we are never, ever, ever going to get to know the real Vince McMahon.
No.
And then I said to myself, actually, that probably was the real, everything we saw there was the real Vince McMahon. You have to, the man is just psychologically broken. That's me speaking, not David. That's what I took out of it. That was sort of how I summed it up.
I don't think, I agree. I mean, I'm not sure that he would be capable about being more honest than he was about himself.
Right. Interesting.
I'm not sure that he's ever had any reason to be that introspective about it. And certainly his reluctance to talk about himself, both in this documentary, but historically also, is, an escape from actually having to deal with the content of what he would have to talk about and reliving the memories and everything else. Because for as much as he says he doesn't like to dwell in the past,
his whole life is about the past because he puts things in the storylines and
his whole life is a tribute to the past in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
He says he doesn't want to be in he doesn't like pro wrestling. He always wanted it to be something bigger. But every time he tried to make something else, it failed, right? I mean, and he sort of, it seemed like in just trying to escape pro wrestling. I mean, escape is the big theme, right? Escaping the trailer park, escaping his father's shadow, escaping the strictures of pro wrestling. It never worked out for him. You can't outrun the past, but that's a lesson that I don't think he ever really learned. I mean, I think that you're right. I think that there's a lot more of Vince's psychology to mine, but I don't know that
you're capable.
I mean, if we got 50 more hours of interviews with him, or the editors, I'm sure, could have pieced together a more in-depth psychological profile, but I don't think he would have given us anything that he realized was deeper in any sort of way.
That was my takeaway from it. A couple of random quick ones, just before I wrap it up. Anybody you guys didn't get who you really wanted to get as a talking head on it?
Well, I mean, as far as like people that turned down interviews, I mean, I don't know that there was anybody aside from the family, aside from the executives at WWE. I mean, I wanted to get Kevin Dunn early on just because I thought it'd be a get, like it would be the first time he was really on camera talking about any of this stuff.
Yeah.
And obviously he spent a lot of time very close with Vince.
Right.
We would have loved to, I would have loved to see another interview with Shane, with Stephanie, with Triple H after, all the allegations came out.
I thought Triple H was very telling in his answers. Like, he didn't come out directly and say this is a crazy man, but he sort of said it. That was
I mean, it does seem like you could just see from the way that with the videos of them kind of like hobnobbing backstage, it seems like on some level he's operating obviously with a freedom that no one else really has with Vince, right? I mean, he's married into the family, and I think he's able to operate well. I mean, in general, in business, in the wrestling business, he seems to operate as a human being in a way that a lot of people don't.
Which is that in and of itself, I think, is fascinating.
Yeah,
his history.
There were definitely other people who were on the the list of people I would love to listen if it would have been. If it would have been 6 more episodes, I mean, you would have loved to hear from Jim Ross and Jerry Briscoe and the people that spent a lot of time right next to Vince.
Yeah.
But we kind of got to a point, I think, I mean, I can't speak for the production team, where like the bases were covered and we were again in the territory of stuff where people say, I've heard that before. So you kind of just have to keep moving.
I don't know if you know this or this goes above you, but do you know what reaction has been from inside the WWE current sort of incarnation there without Vince? Are they pissed about the doc? Are they indifferent to the doc? Are they maybe in a way happy that Vince is being exposed because they don't want him ever coming back to the company? Because that's the vibe. I mean, you cover this. The vibe I get from all the wrestlers since Vince has been booted is that they love the Triple H regime and they're so glad that Vince isn't there. So I'm just wondering if you have anything on that.
I would be lying to say that I did if I said that I did. But my guess is that they would probably be, in general, happy to move on from Vince. And if this helps in that process, that's fine. Now, at the same time, they're named in some of the lawsuits. Who knows if they're involved in the federal investigation that's going on? So I'm sure as it pertains to the documentary, there's probably some anxiety that something that was in it would be, would be something that would implicate them. But I don't know. I mean, I haven't called and asked, and I think that it's, this is the history of their company. Everything we said was fact, I mean, so I can't imagine that they were too shocked by any of the stuff there. I mean, they probably know, more than we do when we started anyway.
And what's really interesting, and you would know this as well as anyone, and the doc sort of gets to this at the very end too. You cover all of the Vince years, which were just complete insanity, even at the high points and when they were making money and he's becoming a billionaire. It's just insanity. And I thought it was great the way every episode ended with like every lawsuit that's been settled. It seemed like, and now the company could not be in better shape in terms of, there's no drug scandals. There's no sex scandals. They've got everything cleaned up. They're a well-oiled machine. Triple H is running things perfectly. Everything is smooth. They've got Cody and Roman, and they've created monster WrestleManias the last 2 years. It is amazing with Vince gone. The company is probably in better shape than ever. And, the guy who created it all is gone, and it's just weird, but
I think that in some ways the greatest trick that Vince ever pulled was convincing the world that he was so intrinsic to the WWE product. Now, of course, he was, there are a lot of people who argue that wrestling would have gone national. Somebody would have done what he did and he never existed. We don't know that. What we know is that he's the one that did it, you know, and there are a lot of ways in which he, and the psychology, the man that you see in those interviews, I mean, that's sort of necessary, I think, in some ways to the growth, just the single-mindedness, the inability to accept defeat, to contemplate consequences. Like that's the only way that a business grows, in, you know, that this company grew to the point that it did. So, but I do think that it's one of the wildest points in this, and this wasn't even in the doc, was when he sold the company, you know, or when they merged with Endeavor to form TKO. Yeah. That he was still out there doing the publicity rounds. That it seemed, and who knows? I mean, I can't, obviously don't have a window into the inner workings of that whole deal. But it really felt like that even Ari Emanuel and the Endeavor people were convinced that Vince had the secret sauce. That it was Vince's singular genius that was able to keep this company afloat. And you know, wrestling fans, diehard wrestling fans, people that, you know, I interact with on the internet every day, we're sitting there saying, no, Vince is what's been holding this company back for the past 15, 20 years. Right. I think that's sort of proven to be true. I mean, in his absence, the company has gotten bigger and better. If nothing else, it seems like the meetings are starting on time, which I'm sure is a benefit, you know, to any big company like this.
I don't see how anyone who knows the business can possibly say the company would be better off with, take out the scandals, would be better off with Vince over Triple H. I mean, there's just no way. It's not even an argument.
No, I mean, there's just nothing to say about it. It just would not be as good.
You mentioned Vince doing the rounds when they merged with Endeavor, and then it happened again in the doc. I mean, the dyed eyebrows, what are we doing with those eyebrows?
I wish I had a good answer for you. I mean, listen, at least the mustache was gone. When he did all those interviews with Endeavor, that mustache was there. At least that was gone. I don't know if you remember, but a photo of him with the mustache and the dyed hair leaked about 48 hours before he was on camera. And everyone thought it was fake. It was like look at this picture of Vince, it's crazy. And then the second wave was, no, that's Photoshop, like whatever. And then when he showed up with it, it was so amazing. I mean, as someone who had been working on this, even in a small capacity, working on this documentary for so many years, I just the first thing that hit me was the vision of us getting another interview, the vision of him walking back into the ring in a different suit for the first time. Because, he gave, it was like however many interviews, he always had to put on the same clothes for the consistency. Just have him walking in a different suit with that mustache and that dyed black hair and sitting down the same way he did the first time. And I was like, I don't even care what he says. We have to get that picture. Right. But yeah, it was, I don't know. I mean,
this is so a guy much, go ahead.
No, I mean, there's just so much, listen, the best parts of the documentary to me in so many ways is just the time spent with Vince, and
without a doubt.
For anyone that says he doesn't say anything I didn't know before, but watch him say it. Watch his face. Right. Watch the way that he says this stuff. It's unbelievable to watch, to just see him processing in real time. And I just think that there's so much to be gained just from the psychological, listen, there's so much to be, you have to read into everything that he says, right? He's not going to come out and tell you anything, but this is he sleeps 3 hours a night, Google it. Right. There's reasons for all this stuff.
What I found really interesting was, even though, like I said, I knew a lot of it, not all of it, but even though I knew a lot of it, seeing how he thought about it and how, there's the whole bit with Trish Stratus and how that tied into what he was doing away from the business. I mean, it's still fascinating. I recommend the doc to everyone. I wrote a column reviewing it. I recommend it. It's a 6-part docuseries on Netflix. David Shoemaker is one of the people on it. He's a producer. And here's what I find fascinating too. If you're listening to this and you're not a huge, I texted a friend of mine who was a big wrestling fan in the 80s, probably hasn't watched it since the 80s. And I'm like, I want you to watch this and tell me, I want to know what I think a non-wrestling fan would be blown away by the documentary.
Yeah.
From the standpoint of the growth of the business, the changes in the business, what he did with the business, and then the cycle. And then this figure who did these horrific things, and horrific things were done to him. I almost feel like the non-wrestling fan would get more out of it in a weird way, because the whole story, if you don't know it, is insane.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, it's not, we didn't make this documentary just for those people. It was made for diehard wrestling fans too, but the people who know not, we had to give all this information for the people who didn't know anything. And we wanted this to be a standalone thing. Obviously, that's the point of, if you have 6 episodes, that's what you have to do. And we wanted it to sort of live on forever. And I think, I know if the non-wrestling fans that I've heard from are, you know, totally wrapped up in this. I mean, this is it's just such a weird world. I think for the real wrestling fans, you lose some of you get sort of immune to some of the stuff that you've seen 100%. Over and over again. You know, just the storylines that he was involved with. I mean, even post Attitude Era, where Stone Cold, he wasn't feuding with Stone Cold anymore, but he was still one of their biggest stars. So we have to find something for him to do, and it's just constantly these like weird family storylines, sex storylines, like whatever, all that stuff. Just watching it play out, like I said before, in the just beautiful way that this documentary was edited and put together, I think is just shocking if you have no exposure to it before.
Yeah, definitely. All right, I appreciate you doing this. Enjoyed the doc a lot. Recommend it for anyone, wrestling fan or non-wrestling fan. 6-part docuseries on Netflix. Mr. McMahon, David Shoemaker from The Ringer. Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, man.
All right. Take it easy.